twisted true crime story you've heard. Kouri tucked her 3 young sons into their beds, then headed down to her kitchen in her luxurious home in suburban Utah. Once she got down to the kitchen, she yelled out for her husband, Eric, to come join her. She had some big news that she heard that day and wanted to celebrate with her husband. A moment later, when Eric walked into the kitchen, Kouri grinned at him and handed him his drink, gesturing for them to go upstairs to their bedroom. The two of them headed upstairs and sat down on the bed. So Kouri told him the big news. Kouri's small real estate firm had just found out that day that they were going to close on a 20,000 square foot mansion for $2 million. Kouri had been working really hard on her real estate business for years, and this was her first big break. Totally beaming with pride, Kouri sat there on the bed clinking her husband's glass and talked about how great their lives would become with all of this additional income. But fairly quickly both of them decided that they were too tired to stay up and talk, so the two of them decided to go to bed. Eric had gotten his COVID shot earlier the day and had been out of it ever since. They brushed their teeth, changed clothes, and were about to go to bed when they heard their 7-year-old crying in his bedroom. Both parents let out a groan and then Kouri stood up, indicating that she was going to console their child, kissing Eric before she walked out of the room. She went down the hall into her son's room where she got under the covers and went to bed. A few hours later, Kouri suddenly sat up inside her son's bed for a moment. She didn't even know where she was. The house was silent. It was totally dark and she was confused. But then she remembered she'd gotten up to help her son fall asleep. She climbed out of the bed, tucked him back in, gave him a kiss, and then she left his room. She went back into her bedroom, where she climbed into her bed. She saw that Eric had kicked off all the covers and was sleeping on his back. Kouri lay down on the bed and cuddled up right against her husband. She pulled the covers up over both of them. Then she closed her eyes to go to sleep. But right as she did that, she noticed something strange. Eric's body felt freezing cold. Kouri opened her eyes and sat up in bed to push Eric, but he didn't budge. When she pushed him, he felt really heavy, like dead weight, starting to panic. She started to yell Eric's name several times, but he didn't budge. Kouri left from the bed to grab her phone and dial 911 when the dispatcher picks up. Kouri is so hysterical as she's looking at her husband lying motionless in his bed that she could barely tell the dispatcher what was going on. Finally, she got her message across and the dispatcher said, "Stay calm. The ambulance will be there as soon as possible." Moments later, Kouri heard the sirens outside and cried with relief as the paramedics ran upstairs to revive her husband. Unfortunately, they saw right away that Eric was no longer with us. The first responders had no idea what killed Eric. He was in great shape. Eric was an avid runner and outdoorsman, so the idea that this guy had suddenly died was really suspicious. When they asked Kouri what she thought happened, she was totally in shock. But she did say, "I don't know, I have no idea what happened to him. But the day before he did get the COVID shot and he had an adverse reaction to it. He really wanted to go to bed, which seemed odd." Kouri and the first responders agreed that it was pretty far-fetched for the shot to lead to death. Eric unaliving himself was brought into the equation, but he didn't have any reason to want to harm himself. He was a very loving father who adored his sons. He coached on all of their sports teams and went on adventures with him. In addition, his business was booming and he had just heard that night that his wife's was going to start booming as well. Eventually, the police told Kouri that it was time to open up an investigation. She could barely understand what the cops were saying. Her mind was on her 3 sons that were still asleep, unaware that their dad had passed. While the family waited for autopsy results, Kouri focused all her energy on her 3 boys who were heartbroken at the loss of their father. Eric was such a handsome father that his absence was enormous in these boys' lives. Since the kids were so little, they really couldn't grasp what happened. They asked Kouri things like, "Where's Dad? When can I see him again?" These questions broke Kouri's heart. She didn't have any answers for them. She tried to find a children's book that dealt with grief in the hope that it would help her sons and what they were going through. None of the books she bought helped at all. A few weeks later, while the details around Eric's mysterious death were still unknown, Kouri called her sons over and told them stories about their dad. As she told them these stories, she began drawing pictures of Eric with wings and a halo, waving at the family below. It was the first time since Eric's passing that the boys connected with the fact that their father was gone. However, through the stories, they still had this meaningful connection with him. Every night, Kouri would tell these stories and draw these pictures. With no new information and no closure about Eric, Kouri had an epiphany. She could see how powerful the stories were and how it has helped her boys cope with this loss. So she decided to make a grief book to help other families in similar situations as her. 6 weeks after Eric had passed, Kouri was backing out of her driveway when she saw a police car coming her way. It was the lead detective on Eric's case. Immediately after getting out of the car, the detective said that he had big news for her. He knew he had to tell her in person because it was going to be very upsetting. He told her that the autopsy results were in. Eric did not die of natural causes. He actually died from a substance that is very powerful and often mixed with age. Just a little bit of this substance can be lethal. It turned out that Eric had 5 times the lethal dose in the system. Kouri was totally shocked by this news and told the detective that Eric doesn't use substances. It really didn't make any sense. The detective was respectful and said, "I totally understand, but these are the results. We need to find out where he got this substance from. We are going to search all of the devices in your house to see if we can find communication with whoever got the F." As she began thinking about all of their devices, she suddenly remembered that Eric's business partner Cody had taken his laptop shortly after his passing. Cody had been a thorn in the family side for several years now. Eric and Cody had been very close friends when they started their business together 10 years back. However, they had a serious fallout 2 years before. Kouri told the detective when the men were out on an elk hunting trip, Eric had illegally shot a bull elk. Cody reported it to the game warden, causing Eric to lose his hunting license. They remained business partners, but it was clear that their relationship was totally fractured. Kouri believed that Cody had more to do with the substances than he let on. The detective told Kouri that he appreciated the information and was allowed to collect all of the devices. After this conversation with Kouri, the investigation fell off. When they talked to Cody, they didn't find anything worth pursuing. There was nothing for the police to operate on. While the family waited for answers, Kouri focused her energy on taking care of the boys and writing her grief book. A year later, the police still had no idea what happened to Eric, but the grief book was finally done. It was posted on Amazon, and right away the book was a total hit with parents of grieving children. As more 5-star reviews poured in, so did requests for her to be interviewed on TV. Kouri had no idea her book would be so successful, so at first she was terrified to appear on any shows. Eventually, she decided to say yes to all the interviews because she was very proud of what she and her kids created. She knew that Eric would be proud too. However, what Kouri didn't know was there was going to be a massive unintended consequence from publishing this book. Ever since Eric passed away, the police searched every device looking for a connection to where he got the lethal substance. At some point during the search of the devices, the police found something very unusual. They knew it very likely had to do with Eric's passing. Unfortunately, they didn't have any evidence to prove that, so they had to sit on it because of the media attention from Kouri's book. Eric's passing also got a lot of media attention. The unsolved nature fascinated the public and tons of tips began pouring in. The general public believed that he did not overdose on that substance. He was murdered. The alleged killer, from the public's perspective, was the same person that the police in Utah had become suspicious of from the unusual things they found on the devices. Shortly after getting these tips, the police in Utah finally believed they had enough evidence to go after this person and they headed out to make an arrest. Because the case is ongoing, we don't know exactly what happened, but this is what the prosecutors think happened the night of Eric's passing. That night, Eric was upstairs when he heard Kouri calling for him, telling him to come down and join her. So he went down and greeted her in the kitchen. Immediately he saw his wife grinning ear to ear and she probably handed him a drink and said, "I have big news and we're going to celebrate." After that, the two of them headed upstairs, clinked their glasses and took a sip from their cups. Tea. The drink that Kouri made for both of them is called Moscow Mule. Tea is made with ginger beer, vodka, and lime. But when Kouri made Eric's drink, she added one additional ingredient, a lethal dose of F. It turned out that Kouri had been stealing money from Eric's bank accounts and he had found out. Eric also discovered that Kouri has been taking out massive loans in their family's name, which he was really upset about. In fact, he was so upset with Kouri that he wanted a divorce. Sensing that the divorce was imminent and the money faucet would be turned off, Kouri took out a $2 million policy on Eric and then killed him. Then shortly after that, she wrote a grief book to help her sons cope and sold it for a profit. Police said that Kouri had been working for weeks trying to figure out the right amount of F to give her husband. The story that she told first responders was also a lie. After she poisoned her husband, while he was laying there still on the bed slowly dying, she just got up and paced around the house for several hours. During that time, she was Googling things such as how to destroy electronic evidence and prisons for the rich in America. These searches were highly suspicious things that the police saw when first looked through the devices, as much as it made them think that Kouri had something to do with Eric's death. They didn't have enough to arrest her. However, after Kouri published her book and went on a huge tour, Eric's family knew she had something to do with it. Here is Eric's sister's statement in court. We have watched as Kouri has paraded around portraying herself as a grieving victim and widow, while trying to profit from the death of my brother, both by trying to profit from a book about his death and trying to get life insurance and assets that should go exactly where Eric wanted them to his boys. She also says he spent his final moments in betrayal and terror. She also says Kouri was too distraught to do funeral arrangements but was closing on $2 million home deal.
I don't know, because I don't know.